This is Ryan and Michelle, and welcome to the Celebrate MarriageCast, where we hope to restore and reclaim godly marriages through honest and real conversations.
Yes, welcome. Welcome to episode 29. And Ryan, how exciting. The numbers for the podcast are really snowballing. And we just want to say thank you to our listeners for tuning in, for listening, for subscribing, for sharing with your friends. If you are listening, you are one of over 25,000 subscribers that we now have for the Celebrate Marriage Cast between YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and last week's episode has 20,000 listens alone. So thank you for really helping us with that mission to reclaim and restore godly marriages. So Ryan, those numbers are mind-blowing.
Yeah, incredible.
Like the internet is such a strange, but also really cool thing and technology. So thank you for sharing this and thank you for listening today. We've had so many amazing guests lately. Last week, we had Kevin A. Thompson. Ryan, he was incredible.
Yeah, it was
super
a great
solid
conversation. Yeah.
Pastor and author. He wrote the book Stay in Your Lane, such practical tips. So go back and watch that episode if you did not listen to it. Talked about parenting advice and all sorts of just marriage advice, life advice with a common, just a really simple principle that you can apply. So that was last week. And then just looking ahead next week really quick, do tune in. We have David and Helen Smallbone, who are the parents of some people that our listeners have heard of, right, Ryan?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell them whose parents they are?
So they are the parents of some famous musicians that you may or may not know. Rebecca St. James, as well as Luke and Joel Smallbone from the band For King and Country.
Amazing. And they are just incredible people. Such an amazing story. There's an upcoming movie about them, Unsung Hero. So we really want to just start talking to them about that story and helping to promote the movie. It's so good. We got a chance to see that movie last week. Yeah. We got a private sneak preview link, and that was incredible. So cool with Mother's Day around the corner. Such a great movie coming out at the end of this month. So back to today, Ryan, we have another amazing guest. And this guest, our viewers probably and listeners have heard of from our previous episode. We are excited to welcome back Tony Boer. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thanks. I must have passed the test, so I get to come back, right?
You did.
All right.
Yes. And for our listeners, Tony, if you recall, is a licensed therapist, author, and coach. He practices at Sioux Empire Christian Counseling in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He is a licensed therapist specializing in marriage, and he has accumulated over 20 years of experience in assisting couples in overcoming various challenges such as infidelity, frequent arguments, communication breakdowns, financial struggles, and sexual difficulties. So, Tony, again, so good to have you be back on the show. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Tony, not only a licensed therapist, also a professional soccer player.
In my dreams. I told people, like, if I didn't meet my wife and I wasn't over here, my dream would have been to be a professional soccer player. I don't know if that would ever happen, but you can still have whatever dream you want, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Amateur soccer player?
Amateur would probably be all right, yeah.
Yes, we've seen you out there. Yeah, moving.
It's just fun, right?
Yeah.
And it's a good therapy, good exercise, good fun, just to be around other people.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Tony,
Absolutely.
You were zipping around the field. When we saw you the other week, it was so cool. First, now that we know you, to like see your team playing, but you were zipping.
Yeah, you say that, but
really
that was
fast.
the beginning of the game. I wasn't zipping towards the end of the game, right? I don't last very long, but
It's
it was still
all right.
fun.
The part we saw was very impressive.
Very impressive. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
got some wheels.
Well, thank you. Awesome. Well, Tony, Michelle kind of pointed this out, and I think this is a great segue leading into next week's episode. Just really about looking at marriage and parenting, or maybe marriage in the middle of parenting. So, everyone listening, and is married, we know that marriage is hard work. Okay, now when you add in kids, now we have hard work plus figuring out how to raise kids and having them turn out okay. That's every parent's wish is to have kids that turn out okay.
Or better than okay.
Or better than okay is maybe
even average isn't terrible, right?
Right. So
just to get them to survive and be alive and well.
Right. Yeah, right. So to all of you out there who are married, congratulations. And those who are married with kids, double congratulations.
Yeah.
So
nice.
The truth is marriage and family requires a lot of work. And we know that it can be rewarding, but can also be a great challenge. So, Tony, let's talk about this topic of marriage and parenting and how we can succeed as parents, knowing that we need to spend time with our kids, but also knowing that the health of our marriage is important as well.
Right. And just know that it's really hard, right? What do kids take to be healthy and successful? Time and energy. What does a marriage take to be healthy and successful? Time and energy. Right? What do you have the least of? Time and energy.
Right.
So it's a kind of a bad setup, right? And there's a lot of statistics that say that when your marriage satisfaction starts high, then when you have kids, it goes down and kind of stays lower until your kids gradually get out of the house, right? So hopefully with this podcast, what we can talk about is, can we make that dip not quite so big, right?
Yeah.
So that we can balance that out a little bit. And what's the trickiest is it starts with, where are you spending your time and energy, right? Are you spending your time and energy being a mom and dad or a husband and wife? And most of the time when you have kids, you're spending your time being a mom and dad. And if you happen to go, man, I don't really feel connected to my wife, that's probably because you guys are spending more time doing mom and dad jobs and being a mom and dad. And just learning how to even just change that perspective. What do you do? Are we working on mom and dad stuff? Or are we working on husband and wife stuff? And you have to be really aware because it starts really easy and unintentionally, right? So if I come home and I'm like, hey, I got 30 minutes, Michelle's my wife too.
Right.
We got to clarify that.
Yeah.
I got 30 minutes, Michelle. Do you want me to spend that with the kids or would you like to spend that with you? She's going to go, just spend it with the kids, right? And if my wife says, hey, Tony, I got a few minutes. Should I spend it with the kids or with you? I'm going to do the same thing. Spend it with the kids. So we, out of this noble, unintentional thing, give to the kids, give to the kids, give to the kids. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm feeling really left out. And I did that. I was taking one for the team. My wife takes one for the team, but it doesn't always work that great. And you'll hear lots of marriage therapists and research say, hey, put your spouse before your kids. That sounds really good and sounds pretty cool. It's really not practical, right? We're probably going to put our kids before our spouse. And that's okay. We just need to try and get that balance a little bit better.
Sure. So if connection is the key, like how do you find that balance? Because I think it's one of those things that's like easier said than done, but how do you find that balance? How do you find that time to connect?
Yeah, you have to be really wise with your time, right? And smart. So there's going to be times where you have to carve out and do stuff outside of with the kids, right? And so there's ways you can work on your marriage or work on your husband-wife jobs with the kids, and there's ways that you can do it without the kids, right? And some of the ways doing it without the kids are obviously pretty easy, right? We've even talked about that. Just go on a date night, right? Yeah. Have a 20-minute talk.
Sure.
Right? But the 20-minute talk can't have any kids' business. It's just you guys' stuff. Being just wise with your time as far as make that a priority, right? With date night, you can postpone it, just can't cancel it. So you may have to change it around, right? But be intentional, put that on there. And those are pretty easy ones. They're still hard with time, but the ones that I think are, for me as a marriage therapist, are a little more fun to talk about is how can you be good husband and wife with your kids present in the room?
Sure.
Yeah.
You guys got any ideas before I tell you?
I was just trying to think of how we've done that. I feel like we model love and respect to each other. If we have, some kind of disagreement, we're able to work through that in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think how you handle conflict can be a great lesson.
Absolutely.
In teaching your kids how to do that.
Yeah. And just that's a big one. Teaching your kids how to fight, right? Can you do that in front of your kids? Same thing. It's a great goal to say, hey, never fight in front of your kids. That's really awesome if you can pull it off. Most people can't, right? You're going to have a few fights in front of your kids. Take the time and resolve the stuff in front of your kids.
Yeah.
Right? Think about growing up. There's lots of times where you'd see your parents having a fight. They'd send you off to your room or downstairs. You wake up in the morning and everything's fine. We have no idea what our parents did, right? Did they just ignore it and go to bed and move on in an unhealthy way? Did they spend an hour talking about things and really hash things out and resolve? You have no idea. So think about that as an option when you're having a fight or an argument in front of your kids. Let's resolve it in front of the kids. Let's teach them that, right?
Yeah.
And to teach them some boundaries, right? I remember one time my daughter came in and me and my wife were sitting outside and we were having a fight. We were talking. She's like, hey, Dad, I need this. And I'm like, hang on a minute. Me and your mom are fighting. I'll be in there in a few minutes. And she's like, okay. And she walked out. I'm like, oh, I think that was a parenting success, right? She wasn't freaking out. She wasn't crazy.
Sure.
She's like, I know what you guys are doing. You're just talking. And it was just role modeling that having an argument, having a disagreement isn't terrible and bad, right? And so you can do that in front of your kids. You can even set some boundaries, right? It's like, hey, hang on a minute. We teach our kids to take turns all the time, right? Can you take your turn? Yep, hang on. It's not your turn yet. I'm talking with Mom. You can have Mom in a few minutes. I need her. Those are all cool ways where you set some cool boundaries, show respect and love, and we're teaching parenting things, right? Take your time or take your turn, do some of those things. And you even said love and respect. Another fun one to do is kiss, be flirty, have fun in front of your kids, right? Have them go, ew, gross, I don't like that.
They pretend like they don't like it, but they do.
Right.
But
makes them feel
that's
secure.
what we want our kids to see, right? If we talk about parenting, it's like, I want my kids to know that I love my wife and care about her and have fun around her.
Right.
We can role model that. Sometimes we get so focused on being mom and dad that we kind of forget. We can actually be husband and wife in front of them, and that's really helpful.
I think too, because we're modeling what we want them to seek out in a future mate too, right? So if we're teaching them how to fight fair, how to love well, how to show that love and respect, we talked about that last week as well, then that is going to be what they're going to look for. And Tony, I think I was thinking about the example of the fighting. I think for me personally, it's like, I want the kids to know that I do love, respect, and cherish and honor Ryan. So I think just the other week we had something where I was kind of upset about something, and I realized that just what you said, the kids never saw how it turned out. They knew I was kind of frustrated, but they never saw the rest of that. So the next day I was like, hey guys, I just want you to know, I'm sorry about this. Here's what happened. And, I shouldn't have reacted that way to your father, and just stuff like that, where I want to honor Ryan and I want them to see me treating my spouse well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's spot on, Michelle. You're we're modeling what we want them, what we want them to do.
Yeah.
And as an example, it's the example they have for what their marriage will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Last week you talked about how, it's possible for people to break the cycles that they grew up with, but if you kind of work that in reverse, we are modeling what your parents are going, or what your children are going to kind of live out.
Yeah,
so how can you
break that cycle?
Yep.
And part of that cycle is, we were never taught. We don't know how to do that. Okay, well, part of breaking that cycle is let's show and role model that, right? Yeah. And to do that. And you're doing it well when you get that, hey, we're fighting. I'll deal with you in a few minutes. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right? If you're fighting and your kid goes, oh no, are you guys getting a divorce? What's wrong? It's like, oh, we haven't taught you very well. We're fine. We're okay, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about, I'm just mad at your dad, but we're okay. We're all right. And there's a lot of those opportunities to kind of teach that. Is like, are you ever mad with me? Yeah. Okay. Do you still love and care about me? Yeah. Okay. Can I be mad at your mom? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And can I still love and care about her? Yeah. And so it's like, can we talk this through? Can we do that? And so even having the kids around or just being, they don't have to be like listening to every little piece of that, but to see is like the world isn't ending when you're frustrated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you want to hear that from your kids, right?
Yeah.
If your kids are mad or upset, you want to hear that. You want to hear that from your spouse. And sometimes it doesn't always come out nice and smooth and kind and cool. Our kids don't always say it nice, kind, and cool. We're not always going to say it nice and kind and cool. But ultimately, we want to hear that. And so it's just role modeling and practicing. And the cool part is that's all parenting, but it also builds your connection with each other. Right? You're working on that husband-wife thing. So when you're like, hey, I want to show my kids love and respect, that I love and respect him. You actually get to feel that too. It's like, man, that felt actually pretty cool. Or when she goes, imagine how it feels for you if you're in the room or hear that. It's like, hey, just so you know, me and your dad solved that. It was pretty cool and we're good. Wow, that feels good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we realize how much it probably... we as parents realize how much it probably does impact the kids to watch that. So I love that what you said, Tony, about just having that conversation with them so they know like, hey, we're going to work it out. You know, we're committed to each other. Ryan, do you remember, it's been a while now, but Thomas was reading a book. He's a really, really advanced reader. So we have to sometimes be careful that sometimes he's getting a little ahead of his age with the content. And he was reading a book about kid or whatever that his parents were getting divorced, and we had an argument or like a disagreement, and Thomas had said like, I could tell someone was weighing on him, and I was like, hey, like, are you okay, buddy? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was like, I remember standing there in the kitchen having this conversation, and he was like, I'm just worried something really bad is going to happen. And he couldn't even say it, and I was like what? And he was like, well, like in my book. And he had shared a couple of days prior that, hey, Mom, this is happening in my book. And I think he's at an age where, you know, his classmates, you know, are from two-family homes and blended homes and stuff like that. So, but I appreciated that he could talk to me about that. And then I was able to say like, oh, buddy, no, like your dad and I are committed to, we're going to have disagreements, but we're committed to not letting the sun go down in our anger. We're going to make it right before we go to bed. We love each other, and we're going to, you know, work this out. This is a little disagreement, but to like reassure him that, hey, we're on the same team. Yeah, and I think I might have said that too. We're on the same team.
And notice when he says that, it becomes really easy. It's like, oh, you're worried about like worst case, we're good. Right?
Yeah.
I'm just a little upset. We'll figure it out. And even by that time, it's probably already solved. And it's like, oh, I can come in here, we can talk, and we're good, buddy.
Yeah.
But that's actually a healthy thing. You want your kids to be able to ask and talk and see and role model that. And so, because if the answer is, how do you want your kids to be married? Do you want them to sit and never express their feelings and keep it all inside and be miserable? No, we don't want that. It's like, no, we want to share them. And that's what was happening. And he got to see that, right?
Sure.
And ideally, it's way better to show those things than like the second a little tension comes, like, everybody to the room, right? It's like, no, hang in there a little bit.
Yeah. So, Tony, if connection is key, what would you say are maybe some warning signs, those kind of flashing lights for couples who may be headed in the wrong direction and need to take some course correction?
Yeah. So if you're not feeling connected, one of the easiest things is you start feeling resentful, right? You get angry, you get upset, you keep score, right? You always feel like you're one down, you're doing more work than the other person's doing. And that's just a sign that connection's just getting further apart. Right? If you feel like, hey, I'm doing 90% of the work here. You probably are, but what that also means is your spouse is also doing 90% and you don't know it, right? It takes 180 to raise a kid healthy anyways, right? It takes a lot of stuff. And so when you have that feeling of like, I'm doing this all by myself, I'm not getting any help, that probably means because you're spending more time being mom and dad, you're doing your tasks, you got your head down, you're doing your stuff, you're working, you're putting the kids to bed, you're doing all that stuff, but you're not connected. And then you start getting angry and resentful. And that will show up in your conversations, right? You'll hear it. It's like, I did this, I'm so tired. You wouldn't believe all the stuff I had to do today. What did you do today? And all of a sudden it starts to become this competition. Who works harder, who's tired, who's doing more for the family. And it's just that example of we're missing each other.
Yeah, I think that's so common. I think we hear that a lot in couples, Michelle, of, just people we've talked to, like, they never do this or they never do that. I always do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or they're easily able to pull up like a record of like, I did this, they did this, but I don't even think I could remember. Well, I know that you just did the laundry, but like we just alternate. It's just like ebb and flow. Like sometimes I do laundry, sometimes you do it, sometimes I do dishes, sometimes, you do.
Right.
It's like, I don't really have a running record of like who did what last.
Yeah, and you can hear that in people's conversations. And that's the way you guys are doing it is really healthy. It's like, oh, we don't have like this person does this. We just kind of work. And how do you know that ebb and flow is? It's that connection. Oh, I can't quite get to this. Can you get to this? Yep, sure. Okay. If you start keeping that score and keeping that list, and you'll hear it how people talk. Well, he does this. He never does this. I had to do this. She had to do that. It's like, oh man, you're keeping score.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really weird when you keep score, you're always one down. Right.
Sure.
Whenever we keep score, it's not like, well, I'm doing the least and she's doing more. No, we always think we're doing the more. And so it just gets to be a mess. Right. And so you just want to listen for that conversation. If those are the conversations you're having where you're feeling like I'm doing everything and my spouse doesn't know what I'm doing, you just want to change that around a little bit. Right. So in having this conversation of competition, right, you just want to validate, hey, I see all the stuff you're doing. Tell me all the stuff you're doing. Start to build that connection there a little bit, validate each other instead of trying to compare who's busier and who's doing more.
How do they start that conversation? Because maybe their perception it really is that they can't see what their spouse is doing. Is it just like, they're not going to come up and say like, so what are you doing? Like, how do they have that first step in that conversation?
Well, most healthy conversations usually start with a little bit of a fight. Right? So it's like, how do we start? There's a little friction, right? Is there something not quite going right? Something's not going. So how do you have this? Like when you have that friction, like, hey, what's going on here? Something doesn't make. And if you can just question, that helps a ton. Something doesn't make sense to me. Why? I know you love me and I know you care about me, but I feel like I'm busting my butt doing everything here. What's going? What am I missing? Right? It's like, oh, well, here's what I've been doing. Here are the things you're missing. Here's what's going on. And so it always sounds nice to kind of go like, hey, right? Therapists always, we say this stuff. And then I followed up with, in the real world, it'll sound like this, right? In therapy world, it sounds like, ask your wife how she's feeling and what's going on. Okay, that's the concept. In the real world, it's like, what are you doing? This makes no sense to me. I'm frustrated. And so like it'll start with a little bit of friction, but if you can hang in there and goes like, all right, the friction means we're not on the same page. We got to figure out this connection. Let's actually figure out what we're missing, all right? Where are we losing this? What's going on? And as you solve it, it becomes really easy. Oh, I know why I'm not connected to my wife. I've just been busy running to soccer practice, doing this, doing these things. She's doing this and this. That's why I'm not connected. It's not because I'm busting my butt and she's doing nothing. And when she starts to tell me, hey, Tony, here's the stuff I've been doing, I'm like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even know that. She's like, well, I made supper. I did this. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess there was a whole list of things that was happening while I was gone or I was in a different spot. And you're not going to always start those conversations nice, but once they get that friction, if you can just slow down and go, what are we missing here?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's, I think too, that like kind of like what you said, they're probably doing a ton that you don't see. Like I thought of this the other day, Ryan, I was doing dishes. I don't know why we buy anything that does not have to go or that cannot go in the dishwasher, but like our son has some like plastic cups and special plates or like those twisty straws. Worst idea ever.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Why? Like they're so hard to wash. You know what I'm talking about, Tony? Like
they get a little
the
milk cottage
straws.
cheese starts
Yeah,
growing
like,
in the
oh
middle.
my
Yeah,
gosh.
I know what you're talking about.
So I was washing dishes. It felt like for an hour and it looked like I looked at the drying mat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if like Ryan's going to come home from work and it doesn't even look like I had made a dent on anything. But yeah, I had been washing dishes and making dinner for over an hour, maybe hour and a half. And I felt like I had so little progress to show, but I was working really hard. But I thought about that. Like, gosh, things just take a long time to do.
Yeah.
But we've had those conversations where usually it originates from me because I tend to feel a little more overwhelmed easier, or at least I vocalize it. But I think we've had those where it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I did this and this and this and this. And you'll just respond with lovingly, you'll say, well, usually pretty lovingly. Sometimes it may be a little frustrated just because you're you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all this stuff. But you'll usually list like, hey, well, I'm sorry I didn't do that, but I was doing, I was taking care of the kids and I did this. And it kind of like jars me like awake or whatever. And it just kind of opens my eyes. And usually I'm able to then realize, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had totally forgotten that you did all of that, or I'm not giving you enough credit where credit's due. And those have been healthy conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that's really helped immensely, I think, in connection is gratitude. And we've been through seasons. I feel like we were actually we had an appointment this morning and we were talking about kids and sleeping. And,
tax appointment, very fun.
Yeah, very fun. But we had a very long season of not sleeping. So both time and energy was very deficient. But it's one of those things that I think I worked really hard on, and I wanted to see and appreciate when you did something. Hey, Michelle, I noticed you did the dishes. Thank you so much. That's a huge help. Not saying that wasn't a difficult time, because again, we were so sleep deprived for years on end. So it's a challenge, but that was one thing that I know helped me immensely of, okay, I'm going to look for one thing and I'm going to say thank you for whatever that thing is. And whether it's whatever, making the bed.
You didn't have to look very hard for that one thing.
No, but what I'm saying is it's that easy.
Yeah.
I mean, to help.
And that's how you build that connection, right? Is if you look for that, you're going to find it. So if you look for all the stuff you're doing and you're keeping score and how much you're doing, you'll see that, and that'll cause you to be angry, resentful. If you do what you're doing, it's like, hey, I'm going to look for something that she's doing. It's there. You'll see it, right? You won't miss it.
Yeah.
And so that's just how you build that connection, is look for those things. Look for those husband-wife things where you can do those compliments, because they're there, especially with kids, because you guys are working your butts off when you have kids going on.
Tony, this has been really helpful. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Just know when you're in the middle of parenting and marriage, it's going to be hard, right? So just look for those times. You're never going to get it balanced perfect, right? But spend a little time looking for those opportunities, looking for those spaces where, oh, that's right, I got to deal with my spouse as a husband or wife instead of a mom or a dad. And just look for those moments and pay attention to that. And some days you're going to do great at it. Some days you're going to do not so well at it. But a lot of couples that'll hear in my office like, oh, we have a problem. We're not connected. We're this. And I start asking a few questions. I'm like, how many kids you got? What's going on? What's happening? I'm like, just so you guys know, that's normal, right? Is the reason you're feeling disconnected and you're kind of questioning your marriage because you're just spending a lot of time working on mom and dad, which isn't terrible and bad, but it's actually kind of helpful, because if we just change it a little bit, put some of that effort into husband and wife, you guys are going to start to feel connected again. And so it's just being aware of that.
Yeah. Making sure you kind of flip your, not flip your priorities, but have intentional time invested into your spouse. Yeah. Tony, do you want to talk about resources, your book, or your social media, or where people can follow you?
Yeah, I have a book. You can go, TonyBoer.com is probably the easiest. I have You Are Okay at Tony Boer, which is on Instagram. And I just have a new thing out there. I do a lot of like marriage little tidbits and stuff, but I'm doing date night questions. So there's going to be one question a week where you can ask your spouse something that it's not related to kids or parenting, where you just have some fun little stuff where you can have some conversations and do some of that. So
that's very
lots
fun.
of cool little resources out there.
That's cool. And your book, The Marriage Manual.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's cool about the date night. The date night question.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. So.
Very cool. What's this week's question? Or maybe
I don't know.
Need to go there. Okay, well, you need to go there to see then.
Look,
okay, awesome.
A little suspense.
Awesome, very cool. Well, hey, for our listeners, if you have a question that you would like to ask Tony, ask the counselor, we would love to hear that. So, Tony, we'd love to have you back to help answer these questions. So please call and leave us a message on our call line, or you can text that in as well. And that number is 605-9 951-0110. We will put that in our show notes. So text in a question for Tony and we can get to that in an upcoming episode. And thank you so much for joining us today. To our listeners, Tony, thank you for joining us
having me again.
and being back. For our listeners, if you need additional help or marriage resources, you can find us at celebrate.church/marriage. And we hope that you have a great week, and we will see you again on 5 Minute Friday.